Welcome, everyone, to Evolving Together with Christine Labbé, beyond the diagnosis into a new realm of possibilities. Your child deserves to be seen, heard, valued, and celebrated exactly as they are. Hi, I'm Christine, founder of Evolve Movement, a pediatric neuromovement practitioner, conscious parenting coach, and author of Our Superpowers, celebrating differently abled kids and their siblings. I offer new insights, understanding, and expansion that empower you to support your child in a way that is aligned with their soul's potential. You are not limited to the stories you've been taught to believe. You can write your own narrative. It takes 28% of parents with a neurodiverse child to awaken and advocate for change to start seeing progress. Be the change you want to see and take the first step towards a new future. Evolving Together starts now. Welcome to Evolving Together, where we delve into the possibilities beyond your child's diagnosis. I'm your host, Christine Labbé, and today we embark on a journey through the early stages of parenting a child facing a neurodiversity, disability, or complex health needs. Have you ever found yourself reflecting on the beginning of your parenting journey? You know those initial moments when you held your child in your arms, brimming with hopes, dreams, and aspirations for their future? Now imagine if the messages surrounding your child included not just the challenges, but also hope and possibility. What if during those early stages you were met with additional emotional support and understanding? How would that have changed your experience? Parenting is a transformative journey, a path towards discovering depths of love and resilience we never knew existed within us. But when we welcome a child with a neurodiversity or complex medical needs into our lives, that journey takes on a whole new dimension. It really challenges us to confront our deepest fears and insecurities, leading us down a path that we really never envisioned for ourselves. In this episode, we delve into the complexities of parenting a child with special needs during these formative years. We'll explore the fear, the uncertainty, the overwhelming narratives of limitation that often accompany this journey. But more importantly, we'll uncover a path of hope, growth, and empowerment that lies beneath the surface. Joining me today is Cindy Kaplan, mom to an adult with cerebral palsy, conscious parenting coach, and author of Free Fall, One Mother's Journey Raising a Child with Special Needs. And together, we're going to share insights, personal experiences, and practical tips to help you navigate those early stages of parenting your child. But first, let me share some stories with you to add a little context. So grab a cup of tea, find a comfortable spot, and let's embark on this journey together. So I want to share a little bit about my own journey. Some of you may or may not know, but like many of you listening, I too am a parent to a child with a neurodiversity. My daughter Gabby, who is now 10, has Rett syndrome. And I really remember in those early stages, like the road ahead looked grim. Of course, I was in a space of denial. I didn't want to hear the messages, but those messages that I was receiving were that my daughter being on the more severe end of Rett syndrome would actually lead to a worse outcome. So imagine being told from day one, well, you and your kid are doomed. I don't know how that serves me or my daughter or my family, right? So knowing what I know now, knowing what I know about the possibilities that can be reached on this journey, I wish someone had told me that there was light at the end of the tunnel, that there was a way to navigate this journey where there would be happiness and expansion and deeper meaning. So let me share another story. Jillian came to me with her child who was diagnosed with HIE due to a lack of oxygen at birth. And, her positivity and optimism were palpable, which was exactly what her daughter Amy needed. But yet she knew deep down that she was bypassing painful emotions, if only to survive another day. These were her words, survive another day. And as much as she felt optimistic about her daughter's progress, encounters with medical practitioners always left her deflated. Few even took the time to acknowledge little Amy, to see just how wonderful she was. Much was shared about how dim her future might look. And so a mother who was once filled with hope was left feeling unvalidated for her own inner knowing about her daughter and unseen as her daughter was torn apart without so much as a slight interaction. How many parents can relate to this? How many of us have experienced appointments with professionals where the focus was solely on our child's limitations and the dark future that awaited them? How many of you felt robbed of hope from the very start? Although some information needs to be shared with us as parents about our child's condition, there are ways to communicate it, understanding how the message is going to be received and perceived, and how it might impact what happens next for that family. This parent was on the right path, a path of hope and belief in her child, so long as she believed her daughter would believe too, so long as this mother could reflect back to Amy how amazing and wonderful she was, she would grow up seeing herself that way. This is not about attaching to a particular outcome or being attached to normalcy. It's really about creating a positive environment for our child where they feel celebrated exactly as they are, where they're seen, where the right timeline is their own unique timeline, not some generalized chart. Why do we do this to our kids? Why do we compare them to something that isn't them rather than focus on what is there, celebrating and seeing those things? And with that confidence, building on new things in a fun, playful, loving environment without expectations, where there's freedom to explore. I always say that the process of learning is more important than the outcome itself. It's through the contrast that we learn about ourselves, who we are, what we're drawn to, what feels right to us. Now, why is any of this important? Because in those early stages, we and our child are constantly bombarded with what's wrong, what's not there, the bad that awaits us. How does it serve a child to be reminded constantly that they're not okay, that they're defective in some way? For a parent to foster an environment in which a child can truly thrive, no matter what their limitation or diagnosis, they need to be supported and empowered to impart positive influence on their family. Empowered to dismantle outdated perceptions surrounding neurodiversity and disability. To embrace a new mindset, a mindset of possibilities, not limitations. To prioritize the emotional well-being of the entire family unit, and to nurture the child's sense of self, beliefs, and self-discovery, celebration, and understanding. Where in the current system are any of these aspects prioritized? Instead, the focus is on how we can begin to look to fix our kids, and parent support and healing and mindset shift, expansion, hope. Those things are not really top of mind. The thing is, these professionals are not educated on any of this. It's not their fault, right? They're not sensitized to what a parent goes through and the positive impact their healing and emotional well-being can have on both the child's development and the whole family's health and well-being and happiness. This is why we're having this conversation today, to raise awareness about the importance of whole family healing and support for those facing neurodiversity, disability, complex medical health needs, and other conditions. So let's explore another story. The story of Helen and her son Max speaks to the distress of a mother felt upon learning that he was diagnosed with autism, a child she'd tried to conceive for several years prior. Her struggles with never fitting in because of her accent and race, or feeling like she had to work hard to be loved and gain approval, left her feeling hopeless about her child's future. She feared the hardships he might endure. All these painful feelings inhibited her from finding joy in embracing her child as he was, a child that radiated joy and had this gift for bringing people together. It was so beautiful. And as important as it was for this parent to mourn what might have been, creating safe space to recognize her triggers as reflections of herself are eventually what enabled her to gradually lift the veil that was obscuring her view of her child's brilliance. When we don't understand what we're experiencing and why, we can prolong our suffering. It all starts with a greater awareness and understanding of ourselves. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, Cindy Kaplan will join me in a conversation about the early stages, how we can overcome them, and how you can become empowered to start writing a new narrative for yourself and your child. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. I'm so excited to have Cindy Kaplan here with us. So I thought that maybe, Cindy, you could just start by introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about your journey, telling us a little bit about your work. So go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, let me first say thank you for having me here. I'm delighted to be here. And a little bit about me and my background. I'll start in the present. I currently work as a coach for parents and families, individuals based in conscious parenting and spiritual psychology. Going back to my original training, it was in psychology, and I've always had a deep excitement and passion for working with families. So have worked with families over the last 20 plus years in a variety of ways. And in those past 25 plus years have become a parent myself. So I am also a parent of three, my oldest 25, youngest 17, and a child with multiple disabilities who is 22. And that has been a phenomenal, exciting, and growing journey.
Yes. Well, you're a perfect person to chat about these topics with me today, then. Those early stages of parenting a child with a neurodiversity or complex medical needs. That's really what we're going to be talking about. So I thought maybe we could start this conversation by talking about this fantasy that we have of having children and how that can lead us to suffer even more, when we get this news.
I think the fantasy of so many things starts when we're little kids, and I think about just the way that we even fantasize a wedding, right? In this sort of fairy tale way. I think we do that with parenting too. And it's such a normal thing for us to fantasize about what our future may look like. If we even begin to think about the idea that we want to have a child, of course we begin to fantasize about who this child is going to be like. We begin to imagine who we're going to be as parents. It can be anything from, I love tennis, so I want my kid to be a tennis player and imagining they're going to be a tennis player or a dancer. Or I'm an avid reader and my kid is going to be an incredible reader. So when anything happens, like they have a learning disability and reading becomes really challenging and they hate it because it's so hard, to having someone who has zero interest or not being able to move their body in a way to be a dancer or a tennis player, it's earth-shattering. So I think what we don't understand is we don't understand that we are building, developing, and living in the world of fantasy until something is shattered. And even then we don't realize it's a fantasy, but it's happening and it happens to all of us. So I think it's a very understandable, normal process that we don't understand, that we don't see that we're actually in.
Right. And it's not even just with, this isn't just shattered with a neurodiverse child or receiving a diagnosis, right? That this happens with a neurotypical child. We have this idea in mind of what our child's going to be like, and they turn out to be very different,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
it's just that on its own, this fantasy that we have. But let's kind of dive into those early stages, those when we get the diagnosis, and how parents feel. What emotions come up? What do they go through in those early stages?
Well, I can speak personally for myself and for the parents I work with. It's more than a gut punch. It's like, I think we've all heard, it's like either landing in a foreign country that you didn't plan to go to, but I think it feels like falling off a cliff, and it's almost like just a major identity shock. both in terms of I think any of us who have experienced receiving a diagnosis for a child who's already on this earth with us, we often leave that session where we receive the diagnosis feeling like we don't know who our child is, and forget that it's actually the same child who we entered that room with. But now that there's a label, it's shocking, and it's as if we don't know this child anymore. But I think there's also the shock of not only this feeling of who is my child, who are they going to be, it's who am I?
Mhm.
Who am I going to be as this parent? I knew when my daughter was born, like I knew how to be a parent. I knew how to be a parent to this little boy who was at the time 3. I thought I was doing a really great job. And then my daughter was born. And not only did I just have such a hard time placing her, again, I think we don't know that we do this, hard time placing her into some category. So like when my son was born, even if things didn't go according to my plan or my fantasy, there were certain things that I could predictably check the boxes. And that's reassuring in a way that it feels comfortable for us. So all of a sudden we're dropped into this land of I don't know, and these boxes aren't being checked. So not only what is that, but we lump it into somehow we're failing, or they are failing, or something's wrong with them. But I think as much as this feeling is of who is my child, who are they going to be, it's who am I? And I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be the parent for someone who I can't predict their future.
Right. It's interesting when you say that, and it's so true because we're programmed and conditioned to think a certain way, right? We're programmed to kind of have a sense of what our life is going to look like, what parenting is really like. We read all the books. We're all doing things the same way, right? We're all sheep in a herd doing the same thing. And so it's so difficult when we end up in a situation where there's no map, there's no book, there's no how to. We have to figure it out. And when you say this, it makes me think, wow, but what an opportunity.
Mhm.
Because when do we ever get a chance to tune into our intuition, to tune into our inner voice to guide us rather than be told? And a lot of people are going to find this difficult to hear because they're not there yet. When we're getting that message, we're not there yet. We are in this space of, my world has just changed dramatically within a minute. What I thought would happen, what I thought my future looked like is gone.
Right.
Now I can't even picture what it looks like anymore. And a lot of people feel so uncomfortable in that space of not knowing,
Of course. Yeah.
right? The not knowing, the fears, the insecurities. And the other piece too is sometimes we don't think about what comes up within us. Maybe you could talk about some of those triggers that come up for parents that sometimes are completely unrelated to their child, right? That when we experience trauma, an extreme trauma, like receiving, a diagnosis that our child is going to be very different, that sometimes that can bring up all kinds of things that were just inside of us. And it all comes up all at once. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, and I want to address something else that you were just saying, that with this opportunity, and as you're saying, it's so hard to see that in the moment, and it's a process because that grieving piece of the fantasy is so important. Um, but I noticed in a very profound way what I felt like. So my daughter spent the first 4 weeks of her life in the NICU, and it was really striking how when I was with her, sitting by her little plastic crib, I felt this deep sense of connection and this very strong, intuitive, beautiful, profound connection to this being. And when I was outside of the hospital, talking about her, seeing other families, that is where I felt this tremendous sense of loss, of fear, of not knowing who she was, and not knowing who I was. And then back in this NICU with all the beeps and the lights and the nurses, I felt an incredible sense of trust and knowing and just connection to her. So that was just really striking to me. And the piece that you were just talking about, wait, say what you were asking. The second part was to speak about
The triggers, the triggers that
Yeah,
are
yeah,
sometimes totally unrelated, but they
yeah.
come up in that moment, right?
Yes, yes. They come up in many moments, and they continue to come up 22 years later for me. But my relationship to those triggers has changed. Like, I have accepted that there will always be little pain points of things where it looks like, oh, had she been neurotypical, this is what we would be celebrating. This is what we would be doing. This is what it would look like. And those are there because I think it is a real thing that we are grieving the expectations, the fantasy of what we thought it was going to look like. And so I think those are always going to be there. But as I said, our relationship to them can change. So I know now how to be with those pain points, but it could be anything from the first memory that's coming up now is I remember when my daughter was in third grade and she was invited to birthday parties up until that point. And at that point, she stopped being invited to the birthday parties, or I would notice a group of kids going off to somebody's house and Mira and I went the opposite direction to go home because she wasn't included. Those were so painful. It could be prom, like it could be as I don't want to say silly, but like as superficial as like prom dresses or a graduation or of anything. It can strike. So it's about, the three words of saying to myself, it's so understandable, because for however many years of my life, I was programmed to think it would be a certain way. So when it's not, it's going to be painful. And I know you and I have spoken great depth too about, the difference between pain and suffering. And there's a huge difference there. But the triggers, I think our triggers don't necessarily go away. And again, just how we respond to those triggers and knowing what to do with them makes a huge difference, both in the way that we feel about ourselves in our lives and our kids.
See, I love that you mentioned that because it's all about awareness. We're not trying to paint this picture that it's always easy. It's not easy.
No, it's
And we both know this. We both have been through so much. It's not easy. But as you said, it's the relationship that you have with those triggers. It's that level of awareness that you have of yourself. Where do those triggers come from? Why am I being triggered right now? To sit with it, right? When you speak of the difference between pain and suffering, sit with it, understand it, give yourself that self-compassion, that it's so understandable that you're feeling this way. But this allows you to move through the trigger rather than carry it and then accumulate all of this pain on top of each other, right? And so I think this is part of the conversation of how do we empower parents? How do we empower families to really start to move through this with more resilience, with more strength, with more of this capacity to move with ease, right? And I think that's not part of the conversation in the system. And you mentioned even at the beginning of this, you talked about when you were with your daughter, Mira, and you were together, just you and her. It felt like this beautiful connection. It was your intuition, your inner self telling you, she's beautiful, she's magnificent, I love her so much. But yet, when you went into the outside world, all these people were influencing how you felt about her, how you viewed her. So imagine if those conversations started to change, right? Because those conversations are also the ones that we have in the hospital. Those are the conversations that we have with the professionals. What's wrong with my child? This is what the future looks like. So maybe you can speak a little bit about how much that would have made a difference for you. What if there was more of this conversation around hope and possibility? How would that have changed things for you?
I think so. What I want to say first is I wish even before the hope and the possibilities would be getting this message of it's so understandable, which is so different than I'm so sorry, right?
Exactly.
So different. Um, because the implications, I'm so sorry, implies there's something wrong, there's something broken. I'm so sorry that you're going through this versus what I have or what you should have had or experienced. It's so understandable, I think really ties to this idea of the fantasy. Like, it's so understandable that you're freaking out right now. It's so understandable that you feel alone. It's so understandable that you're scared. It's so understandable that you're sad, that you're grieving. And that understandable piece, it's like there's a whole nother layer under here, and there's a whole separate layer above that can be explored. So when I think about what else I could have heard, I think things like hearing it's not up to you to do it all. Your job is not to fix her. There's nothing broken, which isn't to say you're not going to do therapies with her. Your life is going to look so different. And so again, I just think there's something so beautifully powerful of accepting the pain, moving to accepting the as is, and then we enter this place of creativity and abundance and being able to connect. So even when I learned that our caregiver was not showing up today, my initial response was pain, fear. What do I do with my clients this afternoon? Are my clients going to leave me if I cancel one more time? To the frustration and all of that. We don't like to be uncomfortable. And when I learned that our caregiver was not coming, I was really uncomfortable and I was angry. So I felt it, I watched it. Then I'm able to move to a place of, okay, so I don't have care this afternoon. What do I need to do? So I canceled my clients. We didn't have somebody else to come. And that allows me then to be with Mira this afternoon without resentment. I can still be upset and I can still feel the pain. But then if I'm going to be with her this afternoon and take her to her therapies, once I've adjusted my schedule, then I'm able to show up fully for her. And then I'm even able to see, oh, you know what? There's an opportunity here for me. I haven't been to her physical therapy or her occupational therapy in a while. Now I get to check in about this and this and this. So it's not a brushing on, it's not a brushing over. It's not a Cindy, stop complaining. It's no, feel that upset, because that allows me to think, okay, what do I want to look for in our next caregiver, right? How do I want to show up for Mira? How do I want to show up for myself this afternoon? So I think, again, just going back to what you were saying too, that permission to allow ourselves to feel those feelings is actually what it's like. That is the portal to seeing the opportunity and the beauty within my daughter, within myself, within our relationship, and within this world that doesn't look anything like what I thought it was going to look like.
And you speak to, then I can show up for Mira the way she needs me to, right? Then you can show up with a different energy. And I think this is what parents don't understand and what professionals out there don't understand is that for a parent to really show up for a child, to really know, how to support them, to bring in that positive influence, to bring in that positivity, that optimism, to support them in that way, we need to work on ourselves. We need to understand ourselves. We need to be self-compassionate. We need to feel our feelings because when we don't feel them, they just follow us around everywhere, right? And our
Follow
kids
us around. They follow us around. They settle into our body and they create disease.
exactly, absolutely. So, this is why I feel it's so important to, from those early stages, that we support the parent just as much as we're supporting the children, and that perhaps we start changing the conversation, right? Because oftentimes, and you know, you spoke of the grieving part, and we're going to get into that. I feel like oftentimes that's the main focus. It's just the grief. But then there isn't this path towards the light, you know, this other path, this other way of seeing things. There's no conversation about shifting mindsets. There's no conversation about expanding and using this opportunity. You know, it's almost like there's an old part of you that is being lost and a new part of you that is emerging, right? It's a new you that is emerging. And when we can start having that conversation, and this is where that hope comes in and that empowerment comes in, is that a parent can start to understand that they have the power to change the narrative. And you and I talk about this all the time, that we can't just stay stuck in the grieving, right? It's important to grieve, to feel, as you say.
Yeah.
But once we've moved past the grieving, there's another space beyond that. And I think that's the part that is not communicated to us and that is not really known by the general public. You know, professionals are not trained. It's not their fault. Do you want to speak a little bit about this?
Yeah, well, I think going back to well, I want to say that grief piece, you know, as we move through it, it's not that we move through it over and over and over and over again. So going back to the medical profession, I just, you know, I think this is so true. The developmental timeline that we're all presented with when we go to a doctor's office, again, it's not their fault, but they have to use this guideline. And so we're always comparing. There's always this comparison of our child to the typical. And so it's very easy to leave feeling like something's wrong. What would it feel like if the doctor who's measuring Mira on those timelines would say, what would it have felt like if they said, listen, I have to record this. I have to measure her along these timelines, but please know she's on her own timeline. And that's what I'm keeping top of mind, right? Mira is not ever supposed to be compared to this timeline in the first place. Not even timeline, sure, but also just what she will do, right? Whatever, so tricky, every word, whether it's progress or anything else, how Mira's life is going to unfold is Mira's life. And so keeping that in mind allows me to follow her versus continually see where she's at according to the way the doctor has presented it, or the way that I have presented it, or the way that I have believed it. So to hear, I guess it would have felt really different if somebody said, she's going to do Mira and our job is to follow her. And yes, we're going to still work on goals. We're going to still work on maintaining range of motion, learning skills, etc. But there's no timeline and there's no outcome that we're attached to. We're just going to keep moving along the process and accept wherever we all are in that process.
You know, you speak of this and it reminds me of a client that I have. She's an adult and she has cerebral palsy. And her and I often talk about the experience that she had as a child, right? Where she was constantly compared to something that was not her and constantly forced to do things that didn't feel comfortable, constantly forced to do things that were painful.
Yeah.
Right? And that it's so nice to be in an environment where you're playing through exploration. Because even her and I, she's an adult, but we're exploring. We're having fun. We're not attached to an expectation, as you said. We're not attached to an outcome. We're simply open to what is going to occur through that process that we're going through. So if we're working together, as you know, I work with children I do neuro movement with them, but it's really about the process of learning. It's not so much about the goal or the outcome. So if we could shift our focus and look at the process and look at the environment and whether it's a good environment for learning, and the process of learning and contrast and getting to know themselves. If we shift our focus from this place of goals and trying to fit a child in a box, this would completely change not only their experience, but also the parents' experience. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
I want to echo the word learning in all capital letters, because this is true for every single child, regardless of any complications or anything. We somehow, when we become parents, we have distanced ourselves from learning. We believe our job is to teach, to guide, to move on to a path, and how radically different it is. And this is what I think our kids who don't follow our fantasy give us, is this ability to step back into this area of learning. And oh my gosh, like the world would be a different place if we did this for all of our kids. And it's so easy for us to just check the boxes, make sure that they're doing what they're doing for us to feel good about ourselves. And what a joy and a privilege it is to be in a place where we are forced to learn all the time. And it can be applied to all of our kids, regardless of their circumstances, situations, abilities.
Right, there's so much more freedom because there is no way that you have to be. You're just exploring what is you,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yes.
So it's such a different conversation. You're absolutely right that it does apply to all children. And in some ways, you and I have talked about this, but in some ways, how we're beginning to shift the way we're supporting our neurodiverse children, how we're
Mhm.
starting to change that conversation about what that environment looks like,
Yeah.
could very well influence how we support even neurotypical children, how neurotypical children are educated in the school system,
Absolutely.
right? That it's much more about looking at what these children are doing, right? Even to be able to see them, to see the strengths and abilities that are there. Sometimes we're so focused on the limitations,
Sure.
but we're not even seeing what's present. And I spoke earlier, and we can talk about this. We're going to go into a break very soon. But I'd love for us to talk about how we can sometimes see the world through that lens of lack, right? Even for ourselves as parents. And this comes back to our inner work, that it's really important for us to start shifting our mindset, and that it's not just about our children. This is really looking at how we view the world. So we will be right back after this break. So please join us in this conversation about shifting the way we view life and the way we view our child from a place of lack to a place of possibilities. See you soon. Welcome back to Evolving Together. I have Cindy Kaplan here with us, and today we're talking about the early stages of parenting a child with a neurodiversity or complex health needs or a disability. So we're going to chat a little bit about this idea of how we view life, so seeing life through a lens of lack, that if we see life that way, how it will impact how we actually view our child. So I'll let Cindy get us started on this topic.
Sure. It's so huge. And like everything, it goes back to, so listeners can understand, so much of the way that we see our world and our children and ourselves has to do with the way we were seen and the way that we were taught to see ourselves as children. And so of course, we bring this lens into our adulthood. And as we were talking about before the break, that it's very hard for us to see the bright parts of our children, what they are doing well, how they are amazing, and the beautiful parts of them. We're also not very good about seeing that for ourselves. And I know I can speak for myself, especially in those early stages, even in a way that was so unconscious. The expectations I placed upon myself to fix Mira, to bring her from wherever she was to, like, I wasn't even aware of it then, but I know looking back, I was going to be the one to make sure she was walking, and I was going to be the one to make sure she was able to talk. And when these things didn't happen, or when I got to a place of realizing, oh, okay, this is not going to happen somewhere. And if somebody were to ask me, I don't think I could have articulated at the time, I'm failing as a parent, but I know that is what I felt. I know that's what I felt so deeply. And so to understand this expectation I put on myself to be the perfect parent for any of my kids, but especially for Mira, and this idea, I mean, it sounds so ridiculous when I say it out loud now, but to think that if she didn't reach these milestones, that it was somehow my fault. But clearly that's what I was living from, because where I took her in the country to different states, driving her hours for different appointments, some of it exploratory, but also somewhere in there was, I didn't know who I was if I wasn't doing this for her, because that's what a good mother would do. And at some point and some way, I learned, or realized, I'm trying to fix her. But what I was really trying to do was fix these parts of myself that I was feeling broken. And so I can trace that way back to when my parents divorced, dealing with a mother who was addicted to painkillers, a controlling father, loving in many ways, many great things I received as a child from my upbringing. And yet the need to not feel, the need to hold it together, the need to find perfection in different ways, just translated and transferred over to my parenting of my daughter. So if something wasn't going well, whether it was something that I was noticing on the outside or something I was feeling internally, was I'm not enough. And I will say, again, looking back, the I used to describe it as the invisible backpack that I carried, that was filled with stones of guilt and shame and not enoughness, of not doing enough, not being enough, just simply not being enough for her, that I believe to be so true, that even when outsiders would say, you're doing so much for her, she's the luckiest kid to have you as a parent. And I could see, yeah, I'm doing all of this. And yet I also carried these voices of, oh, if they only knew, if they only knew that I don't do yoga with her every day, if they only knew that I'm not following through with all of these physical therapy exercises, if they only knew, whatever it was, there was such lack of not enoughness. And so if I'm feeling that way about myself, and at that stage in a very unconscious way that I can see so differently now, that's going to show up in my outer world. So honestly, for me, the turning point was, one, seen the ways that I am enough and seen the ways that Mira is enough, but also accepting, yeah, there's times that I wasn't enough. There's times that I could have been more, but if that were to have happened, something else would have fallen short. And I can see that from those places of lack, how what I was really missing was the care for myself, the tenderness, the compassion, the understanding, and the permission to fill my own cup first. So I would show up for Mira in a way of abundance and not lack.
But see, this is exactly what's missing. Is there so many parents that remain in the space of suffering because they don't have this awareness, because they're never told that it's important to gain that awareness, to take the time to learn and understand yourself, to get a better sense of where the pain is coming from and what your intentions are, what's motivating those intentions, why you're doing certain things. Looking inside a little deeper. It's so important, and yet not mentioned, not the kind of support we get from the onset. And it has such a direct influence and impact on our children, because how we're showing up is completely different, because we're showing up with all of that wounding. You mentioned guilt. Guilt, so many parents feel the guilt. They feel the guilt if they don't do all the things they're supposed to do. They feel the guilt if, they don't want to look back and say, oh, well, I want to make sure I tried every single thing possible out there to give my child the best life. But what we don't realize is that sometimes when we're doing too much, the child suffers.
That's
So we're
right.
not really thinking about, but how is this affecting my child? When my child is going to therapy 5 days a week, how does that affect their view of themselves? How does that affect their sense of self? We forget the importance of play, whatever that looks like. Whether it looks typical or not typical, it doesn't matter, right? It's that exploration of self. And so when we don't take the time to explore ourselves, as you say, to care for ourselves, to get to know us, to get to know what we need, to make sure that we're meeting those needs, then how can we possibly understand how to meet the needs of another in a way that is aligned, right? Because oftentimes we don't even know what we need because we never gave ourselves the time to think about that, right?
Yes. And you mentioned this, in terms of us doing so much, and we are raised in a culture where the doing is so highly valued. And I think, and it was years after raising Mira where I learned this concept of soul to soul, and it has meant something different to me with every year. But we are, as we get to if we get to the end of our lives and say, oh, I never got her to walk, what a horrible way for me to leave. But also this soul to soul concept, I have taken to really embrace, if nothing else, again, not that we don't work on these other things, but I want to feel like I have nourished and connected soul to soul from both within myself and to Mira. And if I leave the world that way, then my mission is accomplished. And when we're so focused on the outer doing, that place of being with and connecting, and you speak so beautifully to how we can be with our kids, and it's very much in that soul to soul way. But I think we negate that possibility of connecting soul to soul if we stay so focused on the doing and the external.
Well, this is a beautiful segue into the next episode, actually, where we're going to talk about, how we can start to change the conversation from limitations to possibilities for our kids, and what it really means to create that optimal environment for them to learn and play and enjoy that process of learning, right? That soul to soul connection is so important. That's what we talk about when we speak of conscious connection, right? Is really to connect with the essence of the child. So I just want to take a moment to thank you, Cindy, for joining us today. I enjoyed this conversation so much, and I can't wait to have you on the show again because you will be back. You will be
Fabulous.
back. Cindy will be back. We're going to have more of these, but stay tuned for our next episode where we start to talk about how to start creating that optimal learning environment for your child and how to start building that conscious connection. Can't wait to see you then. Thanks for joining us today. You've been listening to Evolving Together with Christine Labbé, beyond the diagnosis into a new realm of possibilities. Tune in every second Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific Time or 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Transformation Talk Radio for more insights, understanding, and expansion that empower you to support your child in a way that is aligned with their soul's potential. Your child deserves to be seen, heard, valued, and celebrated exactly as they are. Are you ready to be the change you want to see for your neurodiverse child? Take the first step towards a new future and visit www.christinelabbe.com or check out our collective site, www.evolvemovement.ca.